It's Friday, the 7th of April, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews back in Brisbane.
And I'm Sam Sethi, CEO of Podfriends, still here in London.
Or just outside it, in any case. In the chapters today, Acast sign up the Obamas. It's Happy Adopt a Listener Month. And Spotify for Podcasters increases its share. And...
Hi, this is Nina Robinson. I'm the organiser of the Birmingham Podcast Festival. Join me later on to talk about what's going on. It's all happening on April the 22nd. We're platforming diverse voices.
I'm Lizzy Pollott, the SVP of Marketing, Communications and Brand at Acast, and I'll be on later to talk about Acast's advertising strategy.
They will. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, more than 4,000 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support. And now you can turn your listeners into supporters with Buzzsprout subscriptions.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
So, James, let's kick this off with, how are you, first of all? He had another trip this week. Where did you go?
Yes, very good. Yes, I had a trip, but it was a trip of about 2 yards onto a very painful concrete path. So it turns out that I've...
Ouch.
Yes, damaged bits of me, but there we are. So I'm looking forward very much to... a lot of economy air travel in a couple of weeks' time. That's going to be really good with 2 fractured ribs. But,
oh, no.
Yes,
Ouch.
2 fractured ribs, yes. But anyway, enough of that. There are people who are tuned in who have much worse issues. So let's ignore my slightly temporary one and kick off with some proper podcast news, shall we?
Yeah, well, Acast has been very busy recently. This week they announced that podcasts from Higher Ground are to be sold and distributed by Acast. Who's Higher Ground, James?
Yes, they are the company which is owned by Michelle and Barack Obama. And this is really good news because, if you remember, they used to be with Spotify and some of their stuff used to be behind the Spotify wall of payment and no longer. So everything is now open from the Obamas and open from Higher Ground. And that's very good news, I think.
Yeah, finally, they might get what they want, which is broad distribution and a massive paycheck.
Certainly, I think for them, it's probably more important that they get a large number of people listening to their stuff rather than necessarily what the large paycheck is. I would imagine that they're probably quite comfortable, to be honest. But I think certainly making sure that people know what they stand for, know what they are talking about is important for them. And so, of course, being on an open podcast platform such as Acast is a good plan for that.
What happened to that Audible deal? That seemed to come and go very quickly.
Do you know, it's interesting you say that because, yes, they signed a exclusive multi-year production deal with Audible just back in June of 2022. Now, I wonder whether or not, and so clearly they've jumped out of that agreement, I wonder whether or not that is partially Amazon trying to save some money and have basically turned around and said, we can't actually afford you anymore. Or I wonder whether or not it's a conversation about being more open and, wanting to make sure that their stuff is available everywhere. And they didn't necessarily understand that Audible is just a paid-for service. I don't know. But that's a really interesting question. I wonder why they have, clearly jumped out of that particular deal.
Again, just for clarity, you said it's a production deal. So is that Audible producing anything for them exclusively? And then Acast just selling ads and distributing it? I don't quite get.
Well, I mean, this is what the New York Times reported, and they said, and they called it a multi-year production deal, although, it's not necessarily somebody that understands podcasting who's written this. They didn't share any specific details, but they said that they planned to tell meaningful and entertaining stories that elevate diverse voices and experiences. And yeah, so, I mean, it could be that Audible are the company who are making the podcasts, and then they're actually chucking them out onto Acast. It could be, as Audible have done in the past, that they have released stuff on Acast after they've been available on Audible. So perhaps it might be that, actually. If you look at West Cork, for example, that was a show that was available only on Audible for a number of years and was then released in a more open fashion. But yes, you make a good point.
The other thing that I think we should think about, we talked about last week, Acast did a deal with Amazon a few weeks ago, which was the deal where they would put loads of podcasts into Amazon Podcasts, but with no advertising, if you remember.
Indeed. And so they have been involved with that. They've also, of course, launched a new feature called Interchangeable ad slots recently. They've launched a thing called Acast Amplifier in Ireland. They reckon that there's even more podcast listening in Asia going on right now. And they have announced that they are going to be part of the new grassroots industry coalition, the Podcast Standards Project. Sounds like it would be a good idea to have a bit of a chat with someone from Acast to find out a bit more.
Well, your wish is my command, sir. So I thought I'd reach out to Lizzy Pollott, who's the SVP of Marketing, Brand and Communication. And I asked her, first of all, what is Acast?
Yeah, I think we are so broad and so wide. We have many different customer sets and we are many different things to different people. So sometimes it is really hard to explain. So if I'm down the pub and someone says, what is Acast? I tend to say, well, do you know what a podcast is? And then once they know what a podcast is, I say, so we essentially host podcasts. So if you have a podcast, we get it out into the world and across all the listening apps for you. We help you make money through advertising and through subscriptions from fans. And then we help you grow that show through lots of different tools and services. So we essentially host, monetize and grow 92,000 podcasts across the world. And we work with thousands of advertisers. And there's pretty much not many countries in the world where we aren't present and doing that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of that shortly. Who would you then say is your biggest competitor?
Well, again, by virtue of the fact that we are across so many parts of the industry, and as everyone I'm sure knows, the industry is incredibly fragmented. There's lots of different players doing lots of different parts of what we do. So actually, there's no one big answer to that question. It entirely depends on when you're looking at hosting. You know, if you are an independent podcaster, you might be looking at us, you might be looking at Anchor, you might be looking at Buzzsprout, Podbean. Whereas if you're an advertiser looking where to spend your money, it's entirely different competitor set. You might be looking at spending, for example, in the UK on our podcast or with Global and DAX. So there's no one answer to that. I'm sorry, Sam, I can't encapsulate it for you.
That's fine. Now, your core revenue generator is from advertising. You also have Acast Plus, which is your subscription model. But let's stick with the advertising first. You announced this thing, as I said, called interchangeable ad slots. What are interchangeable ad slots?
So absolutely. So this is quite an involved answer, but I always like to explain it if I'm talking to the person with the least knowledge in the room. So forgive me, listeners, if any of this is really obvious. So when you place adverts in podcasts, so we have the traditional, what we call adverts made by a brand. They're typically 30 seconds long and they are put against different podcasts all around the world. And then you have what podcasting is more famous for, which is a sponsorship. So sometimes people call these host reads. So that's where you think of your favorite podcast who's talking to you about the brand in question in their own voice and in their own tone. Okay. So in any one episode, you might have slots available for, let's say at the start of an episode, you might have 2 slots marked for an ad, or 2 ads, sorry, 1 each. And then you might have a slot which is marked for one of those host read sponsorships. So traditionally, that's how podcast ads have been sold. Actually, what we did is, we innovated a way of automatically being able to detect, hang on a minute, a sponsor read hasn't been sold in that sponsor slot today. So instead of just wasting that slot and not actually putting any message in, we can automatically convert it into an ad slot and put an ad in its place in real time. So as I say, it's incredibly involved and it's quite a niche subject, but what it's done is it has increased our marketplace capacity, so the amount of inventory that we can sell against, by over 10% in the last few months, which is, you know, in a marketplace as big as ours is incredibly valuable. And it's also good for podcasters because it means they're potentially making more revenue because we are decreasing the number of slots that go unsold for them.
And so that's just something that is available, to every podcaster on the Acast platform, or is it just available to a few of the top end?
No. We've been testing it with a few to make sure that it's working, and it's working so well that we're now rolling it out globally across as many of our podcasts as possible. They don't actually need to do anything themselves. This is all sort of work on our end that we're doing to maximise those returns.
Now, one of the things that I have to say, the penny took a while to drop for me. So I'll be very honest. 2 years ago, it feels like somewhere in the middle of COVID, Acast announced that they were going to transcribe every podcast. And at the same time, Amazon announced it and a few other people announced they were transcribing it. And we all felt that this was a good thing for people who were hard of hearing, so they could read the transcription of a podcast. And I just thought that's what you were doing. And I thought that was very good, maybe a little expensive. And then the penny dropped. I was listening to Matt Deegan talk about it on the Future of Media. And suddenly somebody said, yeah, well, if you take every transcription and you can then work out that a basketball podcast categorized as basketball was talking about cars for 10 minutes for some strange reason, but they were, you could see that within the transcription and you could place car ads around that element of the podcast. And that's when the penny dropped for me. So is that how you were aiming for conversational targeting when you started? What was the thinking behind it from Acast's side?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things behind it. First of all, everyone knows that in advertising, context is queen. Also, for us as Acast, one of the biggest tenets that we hold dear is we want to always ensure that the listening experience for listeners and the experience for podcasters and for advertisers is as great and authentic as possible. So when you bring context into podcast advertising, it becomes incredibly powerful. So you're right. So in transcribing, hundreds and thousands of podcast episodes, our data scientists got to work, and suddenly the opportunity for advertisers to capitalize on that was really clear. So what we've done is we've launched a suite of targeting capabilities for advertisers, which we put under the conversational targeting umbrella. And what's really exciting about that is advertisers are able to target individual conversations on an episode level and get really granular in where their adverts are appearing. So traditionally, podcasts are categorized into different categories depending on the topic of the show. So if you have a podcast, let's take Off Menu. Off Menu, one of the UK's biggest podcasts, hosted by two comedians, Ed Gamble and James Acast, two brilliant comedians, I may say, where they get a celebrity on to talk about their dream meal. So ostensibly, that is a category classified as a food podcast and a comedy podcast. But actually, once you analyze the conversations happening within episodes, the topics that they touch on are so broad that suddenly this opens up that podcast to a whole new swathe of advertisers who might traditionally not necessarily consider Off Menu on their hit list. So the first thing that we launched was IAB category targeting. So the IAB, one of the great pillars of the podcasting industry around the world, has different categories of subject, a common taxonomy, which helps us all, play in the same sort of playing field. So they have different categories which they can assign to podcasts. So the first instance, what we've been doing is we transcribe hundreds and thousands of episodes using transcription technology. Then we use NLP, so natural language processing tech, so things like IBM Watson, also AWS Comprehend, to extract all the metadata from those transcriptions. And then that can match those with different IAB content categories to therefore actually classify individual episodes of podcasts in different categories. So this might all sound quite sort of like top line theory based. So if I give you a very, very real example.
Yep.
So last week, Off Menu, which is, as we know, a comedy and a food podcast, they had on the best actress in the world today, Florence Pugh, picking her dream meal. And of course, there was a lot of conversation about food. There was a lot of comedy. There was a lot of jokes happening. But naturally, being an actress, she spoke a lot about film. She spoke a lot about, different movies that she's shot, working with different directors. So actually using IAB category targeting, that episode can be identified as being potentially interesting to film fans, movie fans, and also film and movie brands. So actually, whereas before we might have just assumed that we'd want to place advertisers targeting food and comedy subjects, we can actually open that up by instantly perhaps serving a Netflix ad or Amazon Prime or for a movie. So that was really exciting. And that was the first stage in conversational targeting.
The other thing you announced there was something called keyword targeting. And again, I was just trying to understand what's the difference between keyword targeting and conversational targeting.
Yeah. So keyword is even more granular. So as the name suggests, we're actually looking at individual keywords that are mentioned within an episode. And a keyword could be just a word like hot or weather or tea, but it could also be an entity. So it could be a person or a brand. So then what you can do is you can actually advertisers can actually target mentions of individual words within episodes. So they can get even more granular if there's a particular topic in question they want to target. So actually, by way of example, again, if we carry on with the episode of Off Menu from last week, so another part of the conversation, Florence happened to talk about a birthday present that she bought for her grandmother. So actually, if you were, let's say, a Moonpig or a funkypigeon.com, other birthday card brands are available, you might actually want to buy out mentions, keywords of birthday, for example, because at that moment in time, birthdays are top of mind. Maybe you're thinking, oh, it's my, dad's birthday next week. What am I going to buy? Lo and behold, beautiful advert for a birthday card provider is probably going to, make you more likely to convert. So IB category targeting and keyword targeting, they're both parts of conversational targeting. They're slightly different, but they both have their uses. So I would say that category targeting allows for more reach and sort of broader targeting, because if you think about it, there's going to be lots of conversations around particular topics. So brands can go really wide in their targeting in that. But then with keyword, if they layer on keyword as well, they can get incredibly specific around individual words. So I think it's just pretty exciting. That the thing that I would say in general about conversational targeting and looking at this episode level targeting in general is, as you and I both know, the podcasting industry is still so young compared to other industries. And so the potential is incredibly exciting. We still don't know what we don't know. And, we could actually probably just sit here right now and thinking, okay, well, if we have this at our fingertips in terms of transcription, AI, NLP, we could do this. Or what about if we tried doing this? And so that's what our data science teams and our tech teams around the world are sort of working on every single day.
Now, you've also launched a self-serve platform for podcast advertising. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So in the olden days, she says, a few years ago, I'm obviously joking, but previously to spend money on podcasts, the way it's previously been done, and it's still currently done with a lot of big brands, is, through media agencies and working with our sales teams. And that's worked incredibly well, and it continues to work incredibly well. But actually what we've been able to do is open up podcast advertising to a whole new subset of brands, small businesses, SMBs, SMEs, as people call them, who can actually have access to our advertising platform themselves. They can log in. They can start a podcast campaign for as little as $250. They can choose their targeting. They upload their own audio creative. They set their parameters. They hit play and away they go. And they can set up their own advertising campaign in as little as 15 minutes. So it's really democratizing podcast advertising for anyone, anywhere to use. And there's also we're seeing a big use case as well from podcasters themselves. We know podcast advertising is effective. We also know that, using it as a channel to grow your own podcast is effective. So we're actually seeing a lot of podcasters using our self-serve advertising tool to, advertise to other podcast listeners and grow their own shows. So it's incredibly exciting. And we're seeing a lot of demand from it, particularly in the US.
Cool. Now, talking about US, talking about countries, recently you launched in Spain. You also had Megan Davis, your international MD at Acast, saying that Italy was very important to them in 2023. So have you launched in Italy yet? What's Spain like? And tell me more about your internationalization plans.
Yeah. So one of the beauties of the Acast model is that we can be present in many countries without actually having to have boots on the ground. So, our tech platform, the expertise that we have means that where we see demand, and demand generally means where podcast listening is growing and there is demand from listeners to listen to podcasts, then the advertisers tend to follow. So our international team, Megan and her brilliant team, have been, monitoring that demand over the last few years. And where we see it, we've been signing up podcasts to work with us. So in Italy, in Spain, increasingly, we now have a presence in Singapore as well. And we started, signing and monetizing shows in those regions, which is brilliant because, first of all, obviously, it allows us to work with advertisers in new regions, new 100 countries, but it also expands our international reach for, let's say, our podcasts in the US or the UK who might have listens in those regions where we can also monetize them there. So you know as well as I do that podcasting is just exploding. So it's great that we have that agility to be able to speak to that demand wherever it is.
Yeah, you were talking about actually your growth in Asia. Tell me more about Asia, because that sounds like a really exciting opportunity for Acast.
Yeah, I mean, it's another place, as you say, that podcast listening is just growing exponentially. So we launched last year, I think we saw a 21% increase in monthly listens across Singapore, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia in about 6 months at the back end of last year. So now we're working with some of the biggest podcasters down there, and then in turn matching them with some of the, the most important advertisers in the region. And so it's just so exciting to just see, we are in quite mature markets. Podcasting has been around in the UK forever and has been very, very popular forever. And so it's so exciting to see where other regions are going through that same journey we have, and the demand is exploding.
So talking about internationalization and support, that's great news about the growth in the Far East. But I want to come back closer to home. Last week, you announced something called the Acast Amplifier in Ireland. Tell me more about what that program's about.
Yeah, so Acast Amplifier is essentially our incubator program to discover and, supercharge new podcasting talent, which we do for a number of reasons. One, because we truly believe that, there is so much great podcasting talent out there, which just needs that push to get started, and in sometimes support as well. And because, we want to ensure our network is full of as many different voices as possible. So we first launched this last year in the UK. It was incredibly successful for us. And what happens is anyone who doesn't currently have a podcast can apply. They can submit their idea, which is then judged by a panel of judges of, some of our most well-respected podcasters in the market. And then the lucky winners, their podcast gets made. They receive a grant. They receive coaching, consultation from us, and so on and so forth. So it was an incredible success in the UK with the podcast that won that, called Memories from the Dance Floor, which I recommend you all check out, which is doing incredibly well. So we have now launched that in Ireland. So Ireland has long been a very important and successful market for us. We work with many of the biggest podcasts, most popular and successful podcasts over there. So we thought it was time to discover some new talent. So we've launched Acast Amplifier in Ireland, which is now open. If anyone is listening and has an idea and is based in Ireland, I think the applications are open for a few more weeks yet. And yeah, they could see their show being made, as I say, receive that grant, get all the coaching that they need, receive actual materials as well, equipment from people like Shure. I'm using one of their microphones today, and Focusrite. So yeah, we really believe in supporting and nurturing new talent wherever we can. And I'm excited actually to hopefully do this in a few other of our regions as well, once we've done it in Ireland.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, of all the places we've talked about, it seems very North Hemisphere. Do you do much in Australia and South America?
Yes, absolutely. Australia is one of our oldest and most successful markets. I'm sure, as you know, Australia is so unique as a region, and the team down there have made amazing strides. They work with all different kinds of podcasters, publishers. The advertising scene is booming down there. So yeah, it's long been a really strong market for us. The same in New Zealand, actually. New Zealand has a real blossoming scene as well. So we actually have representation, can't say that word, down there as well. And the same in South America. We've been in Mexico for a few years now. We have many, many listens across the region, which we monetize. We have a lot of listening happening. So that's also seen a lot of growth. So the short answer is yes.
Now, Lizzy, we mentioned a little while back about Acast Plus, and we haven't really touched on that. Now, one of your most popular shows is Shag, Married, Annoyed. Last year, you launched bonus content and exclusive benefits using Acast Plus. Is that something you're going to be doing more with some of your top-end slate podcasts, or was that just we'll touch and see what subscription looks like, but knitting is about advertising? Where are you with Acast Plus?
No, absolutely. So we launched Acast Plus a few years ago, I'd say, or was it last year? I don't know. The years merge into one. This is because we believe in helping our podcasters make money in whatever way suits them. Advertising is perfect for many podcasts, but you know what? There are some podcasts that prefer either not to have adverts, or it doesn't suit suit their show. And actually they have very loyal followings who actively want to support them and will support them financially and will pay for things like being able to access bonus content, or in some cases, if they do take ads, to listen ad free. And so, you know, in line with what is happening across a lot of the industry, subscriptions are really becoming such a big thing. So Acast Plus allows podcasts to, as I say, offer ad-free listening, bonus content, you know, special sort of one-off series and so on and so forth. And it's just a way for podcasters to diversify their income streams. And we actually have some of our biggest podcasters around the world. You mentioned Shag Married Annoyed, who have a bonus segment called Extra Extra every week for their subscribers. Mark Maron, one of the biggest and most established podcasters in the world. He has WTF Plus as well. And one of the most successful Acast Plus we've had is in Ireland with Tommy, Hector and Larita. And they're doing really well because, as I say, listeners often recognize that actually you get most podcasts for free. And we're very lucky that ad-supported model like podcasting means that you're accessing brilliant content for free, but often they do want to support and they actually are willing to pay for either extra content or perks. So, it's doing really well. We've rolled it out across all of our markets and we're seeing some podcasters have real success from it. So we're continuing to innovate with it. We're continuing to support it. And I'm excited to see where it can go.
Yeah, no, I think subscription is something that, yourselves, Apple, Spotify are pushing very hard. One of my biggest bugbears, and I don't know if you have an answer to this really, is why do consumers have the perception that podcasting should be free? We pay for music, we pay for films, we pay for books. But there is this odd conception in the marketplace that, it's just, somebody behind a mic and clearly it's free. Why do I have to pay for podcasting? Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I've not actually really thought about it in depth before, other than having to hold myself back when I see people moaning about podcast ads on Twitter. And I just want to say to them, well, do you realise you're getting this for free? And but no, I do wonder if it's something to do with radio. So you grow up listening to the radio, you turn on the radio, it's ostensibly free. Yes, hopefully your parents would have paid for a licence if you're listening to BBC Radio in the UK. But I wonder if it's a hangover from radio times. I never used to have to pay to listen to Jeff Lloyd and Annabelle Port on the Virgin Drive Time show. And many people see podcasting as being born out of radio. So I do wonder if it's a hangover from that. Because, of course, these people will spend hours watching YouTube videos and not think twice about the ads that they're getting in between if they haven't paid for premium. So it's interesting. But I do think that the tide is turning. I think as podcasting grows and as podcasting becomes even more mainstream, I hate it when people say podcasting has just become mainstream, but as it becomes even more mainstream, I do think that people are beginning to understand a bit about the industry and it's becoming even more professionalized, right? So actually, podcasting content nowadays is incredibly professional, much higher quality because of, people have learned how to make great podcasts. So I'm thinking the tide is turning, but I do wonder if it's something to do with radio. What do you think?
Well, I really wish Spotify would be honest and had charged additionally for podcasting, right? And additionally for books. So the $9.99, $14.99 for music, family, subscription. I wish they'd said, and if you want podcasting, it's another $3.99 or $4.99 or whatever it would have been, right? That would have then made podcasting seen as having value. Because I sometimes suspect, I know my daughter uses the family Spotify and then just sees, you've just added podcasting. Oh, well, that's just another thing that's been added, and had no perception of the value that podcasting brought to Spotify. And so I really wish Spotify had done something with it. And Apple, certainly, the biggest behemoth in the market, can change perception overnight. I mean, if Apple just suddenly turned around, as they do with Apple Music, and just simply said all podcasting now is $1.99 or $3.99, it would just change perception. Now, what would that do for an embryonic industry that's trying to grow its audience? Would that kill the marketplace where people go, oh, well, I can't be bothered to pay, I'll go and do something else? I don't know where we are in that balance. Are we too soon to turn on the payment tap? But I do think that at some point, the big players, yourselves included, need to make that a perception to the user that this isn't free and that there is value. And as you said, high quality content is being produced, which is very different to what is produced on Anchor with, somebody with a mic in their bedroom. But I think, WTF and Shag Married Annoyed are put in the same box sometimes as, the one-man band who's editing it, themselves. And there is no perceived difference in value by the consumer because they're consuming it for free every time. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I entirely agree with you in the sense that I think that just if you just look at the stats in terms of, listenership growing, the money that has been flowing into the space from advertisers and also from, in terms of production, I think the perception of podcasting is definitely different now to what it was 5 years ago. And I also think that, our CEO always likes to use a phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. So actually, I think it's beautiful that a Shag Married Annoyed can exist in the same podcast feed. If I open my podcast app next to a podcast that I listen to, which is called Big Boys Don't Cry, which is two chaps who talk about romantic movies every week, who they're not celebrities. I found them quite by chance, but I've become just as hooked on their podcasts as I am, let's say, Shag Married Annoyed or anything else I listen to. And I think that our industry is so beautiful in that way, in that it can really code switch from the big high value names, the big advertisers, right through to people who simply want to make something about something they love. I'm not sure this is actually answering your original question, but I'm saying that I do think that the perception of value is changing. I think audiences are understanding more. There's a quid pro quo, which is why things like Acast Plus are valuable because, people I think are starting to get that, okay, I can listen to this podcast with ads, but if I really don't want to, I can pay 99p, £2, £3 a month and get it without ads because I recognise, the work that's been put into it. So I think, as Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart would say in The Rest is Politics, I think I would agree to disagree with you.
Okay, let's move on to last couple of points then. You did a deal with Amazon Music talking about removing ads. You took out thousands of ads from your podcast and did a rev share with Amazon. What was that all about?
Yeah, so, as I said earlier, we are always looking at different ways to generate revenue for our creators. So it might be through advertising, it might be through Acast Plus, ad-free listening, and it might be a hybrid of the two. So this was something that Amazon wanted to do. They wanted to, work with a few thousand of our podcasters to be able to deliver those podcasts ad-free to their subscribers on their own podcast app, which is great because, it's another way that we are ensuring that we can secure revenue of creators in a different way. And I think, again, like I've said before, our industry is so young that it's really exciting that we can experiment and we can open up these new pathways all the time for revenue generation. And this was just another one of those, which has worked incredibly well for Amazon and incredibly well for us. So yeah, long may it continue. I think it's important that we continue to innovate and make sure that this industry can stay as sustainable and evolving, as brilliantly as it is.
Yeah, and talking about the industry, final point then, you announced, or it was announced last week, the launch of the Podcast Standards Project, and Acast were one of the named partners in that. What is that to you guys? I mean, what is the PSP to you?
Yeah, so Acast has long been advocates of what we call open podcasting. So we believe anyone should be able to listen to any podcast on any app, and also therefore those podcasters be able to monetize across any listening app. So, founded in RSS technology, that is very much what we support and what we champion every single day. So when this working group was first talked about at, I think it was at Podcast Movement in Dallas last year, of course, that's something we want to be part of because we want to supercharge the open podcasting ecosystem for everybody. So when our smart partners, but also in some cases competitors, all want to come together to find a way to ensure that open podcasting remains open and remains strong, that's naturally something we want to be a part of. So we're in that working group alongside, as you talked about last week, the different apps, the different hosting platforms. And again, it's something I'm really looking forward to seeing how that develops and the strength in numbers that we can put together to evolve open podcasting for as long as it makes sense.
Cool. And I'd like to thank you as well. James and I are putting together a series of networking events for the industry. These are B2B events called Podnews Live. Manchester and London were the first we announced, and also drinks in London at the podcast show. Thank you to Acast, who are one of the sponsors of that. So thank you very much, Lizzy. It came through your team anyway, if you're not aware of it, but thank you very much.
Hey, I'm aware of it. And if there's two things I like, which people can probably tell, is I like talking about podcasts. So happy to be involved in those events. And I also like drinking with podcast people. So more than happy to be involved in your drinks as well.
Thank you, Lizzy. Look, Acast doing amazing things so far. What's the rest of 23 looking like? Is there anything that we should be looking forward for Acast?
Yeah, I mean, as we touched on during this chat, we're going to be continuing to innovate, particularly when it comes to our advertising, our marketplace capabilities. Programmatic, we haven't talked about in detail here, but is a big thing for us. And I'm really excited to see how, that continues to develop. Lots more brilliant podcast signings. In fact, there's one we're about to announce today, which is a big deal. So we're announcing today that we're partnering with Higher Ground for podcast ads distribution and sales, which is, of course, the production company founded by Michelle and Barack Obama. So has Michelle Obama's podcast, The Conversations Between Barack and Bruce Springsteen. And that's really exciting for us. So they're going out in the open ecosystem and working with us on that. And, again, we don't know what we don't know. So who knows in 3 months' time what we'll be announcing. All I would say is stand by and continue to read Podnews and listen to this podcast. Look at that, on message.
On message every time. Now, that does just bring me to a very quick question. Exclusives. Is that an exclusive to your platform? Are they now going to be only on your platform? Or going back to what you're saying about the open RSS nature, are they going to be available everywhere?
Actually, that's a good point, because when we say exclusive, it means different to what other partners in the industry might mean exclusive. All we mean is we have the exclusive rights to distribute and sell those podcasts for advertising. Usually that's what an exclusive deal means. Whereas, of course, our podcasts are available and are monetized wherever you listen, whether you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts or Pocket Casts or anywhere else, which is the beauty of Acast.
There you go. Lizzy Pollott, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sam. See you later.
There's LP from Acast. I believe that's what you call her if you're a
friend.
If you're an Acaster, not a James Acaster, obviously. But yes, so yes, really, really interesting, and really interesting talking about where she sees Acast in the industry and whether or not other companies are competitors. I think she was trying to claim that no other company is a competitor of Acast. I think every other company is a competitor of Acast, which is always an interesting one. But that was an interesting chat.
Yeah, they're doing a lot. They are doing a lot, which sometimes when researching for that interview, I suddenly went back through story after story after story, and you suddenly realise that they are pretty much putting out a lot of information. The thing that as I said in the interview, I find most interesting, though, is their use of transcriptions to create conversational targeting and keyword targeting. And I think that is certainly very interesting. I know Podimo are doing the same thing now as well. So I think that's going to be an industry trend.
Well, yes, indeed. And actually, there was a white paper from Sounder talking about contextual advertising only last week, and there's a bunch of other people doing that as well. And of course, Apple has been playing around with that for their searching tools. So I'm sure that there's going to be many, many more. And of course, the benefit of that is that it doesn't require personal targeting. It doesn't require cookies or any of that GDPR scary stuff. And so I think it's a very bright plan. You reckoned that Acast should have been the company that Spotify bought.
Yeah, when I looked at what Spotify are doing with podcasting, I think it's okay. They're growing, but I think their advertising strategy is okay. I think Acast would have been an excellent strategy purchase for them because they would have had it fully baked. And I think given that Ross Adams is ex-Spotify, it would have been a nice thing for him to be bought by Spotify, I think. Yeah,
indeed, and to Swedish companies, of course. So, really interesting. Well, I think it's a case of watch this space in terms of that.
Moving on then, James, AI adverts. Now, you used to write adverts for a career, didn't you?
I did. I used to have a career as being a radio creative, writing radio commercials. I wrote them for the AA and for Vodafone and for various other people. And that was a long, long time ago, though. And it's a good job that I don't anymore, because there's a brand new tool by a company called Adthos, who were actually at Radio Days Europe last week in Prague. And they said that they had announced a self-service 100% AI-generated audio ad generator. which is very clever. So what you basically do is you send it information about your company, and it creates a script. It adds the AI voices, the sound effects, and the music, and it results in a fully AI-produced ad that's available to be played out instantly, which both sounds amazing and also sounds amazingly crap. So I'm slightly concerned about how good that's going to be. What I should really have done is I should have reached out to Adthos and said, please could you write this podcast an audio ad?
Yes.
Because I thought that would have been really good. And then we could have played it and everybody would have heard how good stroke bad it was. And that would have been a plan. But I didn't think, yeah. Well, still, there we go. Yes. Is that the sort of thing that you would have used in your radio station?
It was one of those big challenges with River Radio was local advertising was always difficult. They'd come in with a script and then you'd have to go and voice it and then you'd have to create the jingles and everything else. And then you'd send it back to them. They go, oh no, can you make this change or that change? And by the time all those changes were made, there was no value left in the advert. It was just, it would eat into the profit so fast. This would be a great way to, cut out some of that fat. And again, if they changed it, hopefully it wouldn't be too expensive to make those minor changes and then regenerate the ads. Anyway, that was something I was thinking about when I read this.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can also see, Lizzy was talking about Acast's self-service ad platform. Well, if one of the hurdles there is that a individual small company would have to make an ad for themselves, well, this is potentially a way past that as well. So interesting. I did actually get a bit of a demo from Adthos while I was in Prague last week, and some of the AI, I mean, it's still obviously AI, but the AI voices that I heard were actually pretty good. Now, the question is whether or not the script and whether or not adding sound effects and all that kind of stuff would also be as good. But I was quite impressed at the AI that I actually heard, the AI voices at least that I actually heard. So I think there's certainly something there.
Okay. Now, Happy Adopt a Listener Month. I mean, there's so many other months. Happy Adopt this, Happy Adopt that. So let's have Happy Adopt a Listener Month. Tink Media's come up with a really nice idea. What have they done?
It is, yeah. Apparently, there are still people out there who don't listen to podcasts.
Really?
Who'd have thought it? I believe that the figure at the moment is 43% of Americans listen to podcasts, which means, of course, that the majority don't per month. And so the Adopt a Listener idea is to help non-listeners discover the magic of podcasts. And the mission basically is, if you know of anybody that doesn't listen to a podcast, tell them to listen to one and choose a good one for those people. So it's quite a nice little idea that Ariel and Lauren have worked on. You can find out a little bit more at the Tink Media website at tinkmedia.co.
Spotify for podcasters, aka Anchor, increased its market share in March to 23.1% of all new episodes, James. A 6-month high for the podcast host. What's going on? I thought Anchor was dying on its feet.
So did quite a lot of people. And it may just be that the new brand has actually had an interesting effect, although it was on the increase in February as well. So perhaps it's nothing to do with the new brand at all. But yes, Spotify showing some quite nicely growing figures. This is according to Livewire Labs, which is John Spurlock's thing, which basically looks at every single new episode and then works out who's actually hosting those. Buzzsprout still doing very well, which is nice. A slight drop this month, but still 9.2%, easily the number 2, and they will be for some time. Spreaker seeing quite a high bump, and I suspect that that's probably something to do with the rather misleading advertising that they had at the beginning of March, talking about how they're now free, which, of course, as we now know, is nothing but the case at all. But still, there we are. So, interesting seeing all of those figures, but also really interesting just how large Buzzsprout is. Yes, they are a sponsor, but how large they are in comparison to some of the other large companies, I've always felt that Buzzsprout and Libsyn were neck and neck, and it really isn't the case. Libsyn at the moment has 4.7% of all new published episodes. That figure has been going down quite gradually since September of last year. And in fact, they've just been overtaken by Omni Studio, which is pretty impressive. Omni being a part enterprise, part personal podcast hosting company that is owned by Triton. So, always interesting having a look at these figures from John, and it's a great thing that he ends up doing them.
Now, Spotify is claiming the company now has 5.3 million podcasts. Oddly, though, in October, the company claimed it had 5.5 million podcasts, James. So how's that number going downwards?
Yes, how is that number going downwards? I wonder whether Spotify have taken out some of the one and done shows from 5 years ago and got rid of those, hence the number coming down. But I otherwise really don't know. So it's a strange old one.
Now, talking of our sponsors, Buzzsprout, they released some stats for March, which showed a drop in downloads from Apple as well, and a growth in Spotify. What's going on with Buzzsprout stats then, James?
Yeah, so Buzzsprout's figures are interesting. So this is podcast consumption rather than people making shows, of course. But you're seeing a growth in listens via Spotify and a drop in downloads from Apple Podcasts. And similarly, Libsyn is showing the same sort of thing. Now, Libsyn's numbers are wildly different to Buzzsprout's, but they're both trending in the right direction. So Apple Podcasts going down ever so slightly and Spotify going up. Spotify's had its best figures for over a year in both of these charts. So again, what does that mean? Does that mean that more people are consuming shows in Spotify? Well, undoubtedly they are. Is that something to do with the new Spotify, TikTok scrolly interface, or something else that Spotify are doing? I don't know, but it's a trend that's worthwhile keeping an eye on, I think.
When do you think this Apple Core Media is going to kick in? The 16.4 change. So
Apple Core Media is kicking in as we speak. The new OS came out, I think, at the end of last week, if memory serves me right, at the beginning of this week. So we should see by the end of April, we should see a significant growth in Buzzsprout's figures for Apple Podcasts. And this is where some of the numbers are a little bit different, because Libsyn counts all of Apple Core Media as Apple Podcasts, which is incorrect and wrong. But nevertheless, that's what Libsyn have always done. Buzzsprout have always taken Apple Core Media and put those aside and only count proper Apple Podcasts numbers as Apple Podcasts. So we should see, I believe, this month a growth of 4% for Apple Podcasts, which will be quite nice. And we won't see any change from the Libsyn figures, because obviously they're not measuring the same sort of thing. But it's good to see Apple finally rolling that out. I know that we've not made friends with them because we've been saying, when are you going to roll this out? When are you going to roll this code out? And finally, they managed to put their own code in place 9 months late. But nevertheless, they've done it, and that's okay. So it'll be good to end up seeing those particular numbers coming out.
Indeed. Now, as we said, a lot of these figures we get from John Spurlock, friend of the show, and he asked a really interesting question. How long would it take you to listen to every new podcast episode released last month? How long, James?
How long indeed. It would take you over 130 years. Yes, every new podcast episode, if you played them back to back, over 4 billion seconds. There were 1.9 million new episodes released in March. Quite some data out of that. And I love that John is geeky enough to actually have a look at that and basically go, oh no, well, I can find out even more information there. What he also worked out is if you were going to save all of those onto your iPod, then you would need quite a big iPod, because a month's worth of podcast episodes is 71 terabytes of storage. I don't know whether your iPod is capable of that. Certainly not mine.
Nope.
Yes, exactly.
Nope, not even. Not even my funny phone either.
Yes.
So no.
He also calculated, I believe, from memory, that if you were going to pile everything through OpenAI to transcribe it all, then it would cost $410,000 to end up doing that. So worthwhile just bearing that in mind when we're talking about contextual targeting and conversational targeting and all of that kind of stuff, that you still need to transcribe, individual shows in order to make that work. And if you were doing that for every single podcast episode out there, that would still be quite a lot of money.
Now, talking of Spotify, before we move on, Spotify Live is dead, James.
Yes, Spotify Live is no longer, or at least it won't be any longer on April the 30th. They're going to close the Spotify Live app. They will continue to do some live stuff within the Spotify app itself, but the main Spotify Live app is to be closed on April the 30th. That was $57 million well spent, I think. Of course, Reddit Talk has also closed. Facebook's live audio rooms have also closed. Astonishingly, Space Karen, Elon Musk, is continuing to run Twitter Spaces, although for heaven knows how long, given he appears to have changed the logo on the Twitter website now to a picture of the Doge. So who knows what's going on with that? But yes, for Spotify, their Clubhouse clone is going to be no longer by the end of this month.
Yeah, and I find this really odd because I think last month we talked about them relaunching it, and I said at the time I thought this was a great way of fans connecting with artists and the ability for the artists to then talk about a new album, play some tracks, like the editor's cut of a film. And I thought this was a great use case for Spotify Live. And now it's gone. Yes,
now it's gone. It only changed name this time last year. It used to be called Spotify Green Room, of course. And Ashley Carman, friend of the show, was reporting that Spotify Live shows were being cancelled at the end of last year. So, yeah, it's a strange old one, but clearly somebody has earned an awful lot of money very, very quickly. $57 million for that. It's quite a thing.
Now, moving on to things that start, and who knows where they'll go. YouTube will globally, it says here, roll out a new podcast tab in its main YouTube app this week. Is that for everybody? That's for me and you then?
Not just is that for everybody. I've been having a look at my YouTube app for the last couple of days, hoping that the person that gave me this information knew what they were talking about. And as I look at it today, I can see the new podcasts tab is there. If you do a search for Podnews and then you have a look at our channel, then the podcast tab is actually there, which is a wonderful thing. So that has appeared. And the exciting thing is that it's appeared for everybody. It's entirely global. So I know that there have been an awful lot of exciting stories talked about YouTube Music and how only YouTube Music is getting podcasts and only that is going to happen in the US. Well, that bit's kind of true, but of course, podcasts are still available in the main YouTube app as well, and podcasts are available in the YouTube website too, and blah, blah, blah. So I did ask this person, I said, how should people be talking about podcasts? If I'm a podcaster, how should I be talking about a podcast? And they said, oh, absolutely. You should be saying, listen to our podcast on YouTube. Don't go mentioning YouTube Music because that will only work in the US for now. Stupid idea, but still, that's just the way that it works. But just say, listen to our podcast on YouTube if you're on YouTube, because everywhere else, you'll find it on YouTube. And so I think that's quite a nice piece of good news, I think, coming out of YouTube there.
Well, we shall try that at the end then, shall we? See, listen to us on YouTube as we're there.
Oh, well, maybe.
Maybe. All three people who go there so far will be very happy.
I should point out that this podcast is available ad-free on Apple Podcasts. Apple.co/podnews is where to get that. And of course, if you're listening on a open podcast app, then you may hear advertising which has been put there by the great people at Buzzsprout. Neither of those things will actually work on YouTube, where we will earn no money from this podcast whatsoever. So there is always that, just to bear in mind. But maybe we just need to grow a bit. Who knows?
Moving on, around the world. James, you've commissioned another report this time. What's this one?
Yes, there's going to be one of these reports every month, and quite possibly until the end of time. This is from Guanjin Yo, talking about podcasting in East and South Asian podcast markets. Last month, we did a deep dive into the Japanese podcast market, which was fascinating. This month, it's time for Korea. A place that many ignorant Westerners like me call South Korea. But a really interesting look into how podcasts work there and the history of the thing, because it used to be that loads of people would listen to podcasts in Korea, loads and loads and loads of people. And whenever you saw the figures, South Korea would be number one for podcast listening, and everybody would get very, very, very excited. Turns out that, yes, that might have been the case, but actually, probably South Korea's podcast industry has been contracting a little bit, and part of that comes down to a podcast which was a particular political podcast called "I'm a Petty-Minded Creep."
Wow. Okay.
Yes, was very much focused on embarrassing a president of Korea. Yes, so quite a lot of that has obviously changed, and obviously, in South Korea, Apple Podcasts isn't number one, and nor is Spotify, but an app called Podbang is number one. And so you have sort of really interesting dives into this particular market. It's a great long article. How long does it take to read? 20.1 minutes to read. It's quite a thing, but it's well worth having a read of, and it's a great piece of work.
Again, remind us, where's it available? And
it's available on the Podnews website. If you go to podnews.net /articles, then you'll find Podcasts in Asia has its own section, and in there you should see loads of information, lots of information about podcasting in Southeast Asia.
Right, James. Now, time for those people coming and going. What's been happening?
Yes, in People News, lots of interesting and exciting People News. Jason Hotch, or is he Hock, has been hired by AudioChuck, I don't know, to run a premium podcast network called Wavland. Now, he was working at How Stuff Works and then Imperative Entertainment. Patrick Dolan has been appointed as the new chairman of the board at Libsyn. He became a director in November 2021. He's worked for the IAB as well. I noticed that Taylor Kirch has left Libsyn. Taylor was director of product management and has moved on. So there's obviously still quite a lot of change at Libsyn as well. Jessica Weiss-Berman has been named as executive vice president of podcasts at Odyssey. Odyssey is keeping Cadence 13, which is interesting, but not keeping Chris Corcoran, who used to run Cadence 13 and various other things. And so Chris is off. Max Linsky will continue to co-lead Pineapple Studios alongside Barry Finkel. Also head of podcasting and executive editor of The Economist for the last 6 years, Anne McElvoy, has joined Politico as head of audio. And finally, there's some good movements at our friends Bauer Media in the UK. Lucy Cave now has a new role as Chief Creative Officer of Podcasts and Commercial Content. And also Maria Williams, who's been working at Bauer for some time. She has moved into a new role as head of production for podcasting as well. And finally, a bunch of layoffs, which is probably worthwhile reporting on as well. Obviously, NPR laid off 84 people last week. Tense staff meetings going on there, according to Ashley Carman. Stacey Goers is one of the people who was made redundant last week from Acast. They made 5 people redundant from one of their tech teams. I'm interested to find out what that means in terms of the Podcast Standards Project because I know that Stacey was very much involved with that. Other people cutting jobs, Warner Music cutting 270 people. Don't know about their podcast division though. Roku cutting 200 jobs, that's 6% of the company. And Apple, who'd have thought it? Apple are making a couple of roles redundant, a very limited number of roles they say, and it's only within their corporate retail division, so hopefully everybody else is okay. But Apple are one of those companies that hasn't actually made any people redundant over the last 6 months or so. So interesting seeing on that side as well. But if you're looking for a job, Podnews has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world. They're free to post as well. It'll just take 2 minutes to add a new role at podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk. Sam, are you up and ready for some hot tech talk?
This is my favourite section. So yes, now that transcripts are part of the recommendation by the Podcast Standards Project, really interestingly, there's a new library called Transcriptator, which has been published, which parses transcripts for your app. And it was done by Stephen Akraba. And again, a hat tip to Mitch Downey, who posted that on the podcast social on Mastodon. And yeah, I've looked at it and we've implemented it ourselves for Podfriends, but it's also been implemented in Podfriend and Podverse as well. And it really just makes it simple to take standard SRT, VTT, TXT, and make it an HTML interface in your app. Yeah,
very nice. It's something that I intend to have a play with for the limited podcast playback that happens on the Podnews website as well. So good to see. Maybe there's a new version of Podfriends coming out soon. Martin Mouritzen is talking about that, which is nice. Descript is doing some work. They're replacing Rev with OpenAI Whisper. And potentially extending that to, you know something about this, Sam?
Yeah, so I should declare I'm an official ambassador for Descript. And yes.
Oh, ambassador.
Well, there you go. Yes. I often flash that at passport control. Ambassador for Descript.
Yeah.
Coming through.
Yes. Where's that?
Exactly. You spoiled me.
Yes. And they're doing something with GPT-4 because, of course, they are.
Well, they got the big investment, didn't they, from OpenAI, the $50 million. So it looks like they are extending. We knew that they were going to replace Rev with OpenAI Whisper, but on their website now, they're talking about adding more editing tools using GPT-4. So I'm not quite sure what that is yet. As soon as I know, I will let you all know.
Yes. No, I think that's all very exciting. RSSBlue is looking to add Podping support. It's not difficult, RSSBlue. You can probably do it with one line of code. I have. But anyway, that's good to see. Libsyn has done some additional stuff as well, mailing its hosting customers, talking about Apple Podcast subscriptions, which of course we know about. They also offer YouTube stats into their packages if you pay enough. And they have an episode tracking tool and stats exports and stuff like that. What they've also announced today is that their entire system is going to be made available in Spanish, which kind of makes a load of sense. And I almost ask myself why Libsyn wasn't made available in Spanish anyway, given Elsie Escobar, of course, works there, and and they've been very active in the Spanish language and the Latinx podcast industry. But nevertheless, if you habla español, then you can now use that platform in your own language as well, joining other people like RSS.com and others. And talking about them, they of course own Advertisecast, and they have increased their average cost per thousand to $22.17 for March. It's up. It's not up by much. It's up by less than 1%, but nevertheless, it's up, which is good news. So whenever you see podcast ad revenue up, from my point of view, that's always worth talking about.
Now, we're having this little debate still. Why should we support the alternative enclosures tag? I'm a big advocate of it. And in fact, thank you, James. You added the video to your RSS feed this week, and we ingested that into Podfriends, and now we can show video, within Podfriends using your alternative enclosure tag.
Yes, excellent. Don't do that too much because it cost me an arm and a leg to serve that. But yes, no, that's good. So yes, so the Podnews Daily podcast has 4 different alternate versions now. I think if my memory serves me right,
Yes.
you've got the main
Yep.
MP3 version, the AAC version if you prefer things in stereo, a Opus version which is very low bit rate, and then a video version as well. It's just the video version that we serve YouTube. But I thought actually it'd be useful to have a test, and so there we are. And I wrote a personal blog post about why alternate enclosures are a good thing. And basically, what I'm saying is that. Particularly for the low bitrate version, for the 16K version, which essentially saves you 85% of your bandwidth bill, or even more, that could be done completely automatically by a podcast host. It needn't add any complicated UX or any of that stuff. It could just basically sit there. And then that way, the people that would benefit from a very simple, straightforward, and much smaller file to actually download can have that completely automatically. To be honest, I think that would be a sensible thing for any podcast host to end up doing because, I mean, if you save yourselves 8 times your download bill, then that's a good thing, is it not? So anyway, so I wrote a long piece about that, which Todd has gone, nah, still not doing it. Ownyourown.com. But that's all fine. Interestingly, Rob Greenlee has also said that he agrees with me. So there we are. I'm not really kicking up a fight with Todd. I've got better things to do with my time. But but I think it's just worthwhile having a think about what the alternate enclosure can actually do for podcasting, particularly in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think the piece that I took out of your blog post was having 2 feeds for the same show splits the follow juice between these 2 feeds, meaning the show appears lower than it needs in Apple's charts. I think, if anything, that's the only thing that Todd should start thinking about as well.
Yeah. No, indeed. I mean, obviously, at the moment, Apple don't support the alternate enclosure tag, so you can't switch between the audio version and the video version within the app. There's clearly going to be no expectation that they do anytime soon. So that follow juice will still be a problem. But surely you would want to be higher in the charts, and the way that you are higher in the charts is you don't give people 2 or 3 different versions of your show. That would be what is known in the industry as a mistake.
Moving on. We love you, Todd. Moving on. Cross-app comments are now available on the Podcast Index website. I thought they were a little while back, but it seems that they've made a quick improvement to it as well.
Yes, I thought they were a while back and then they broke, but now they're back, which is nice. They look best on the Podcasting 2.0 podcast. You press the button and it loads the comments in relatively slowly, but nevertheless it loads the comments in so you can actually see those comments ending up going. So that's a good thing there. It's quite nice in that it's properly nested and everything else. It's quite a nice view. So yes, excellent work from that point of view. Podgenie,
it's a new service that turns any RSS feed into a podcast. Quite nicely, it'll pull multiple feeds together in one show. Hey, Todd, look at that. Pricing starts at $10 a month.
Don't bait the Todd Cochran. That's the last thing that I need right now. Yes, Podgenie. It's very interesting. I really do think that it's quite a smart thing. So basically, you give it the BBC News RSS feed, for example, and the TechCrunch one and the Hacker News one, and you say, okay, I would like 3 stories from BBC News, followed by 2 stories from Hacker News, followed by 4 stories from TechCrunch. do all of that for me, turn that into text so I can have a listen to that as I'm driving to work. And hey presto, it ends up doing that for you completely automatically, turns it into a podcast feed, and away you go. I thought it was quite a nice, smart idea. Whether or not it's going to be a particularly enjoyable experience, I don't know. But I thought it was quite a nice idea, and it's something that I hadn't seen. So yes, worthwhile having a look. pod-genie.com.
James, are you still verified on Twitter? Have you still got your blue tick?
Weirdly, I still do have my blue tick on Twitter. I'm not quite sure what Space Karen's playing at there, but from my point of view, yes, it's. At least I was this morning.
Allegedly, from the 1st of April, it was all going to go away, and strangely, it hasn't. A bit like having the Dogecoin dog on the 4th of April come up as an April Fool's joke, or was it? Who knows?
Well, it's still there. The Doge dog is still there. That's
I know.
That's the thing that I don't understand. If it's an April the 1st joke, then don't make it appear on April the 4th, and only have it there for one day. None of Twitter makes any sense. What Space Karen has done very recently is that he has turned a button that says that NPR is a state-funded organization because they take less than 1% from the US government, which of course is the type of moniker that you would associate with, RT or the Sputnik news agency or anything that, essentially takes its marching orders from a government. But oh no, he's decided that he's going to put that onto NPR as well, even though NPR is very independent. So he's ended up doing that. And I should just for the record, if NPR is state-funded media at 1%, then Twitter is Saudi state-funded media at 2.8%, because the Saudi government owns 2.8% of Twitter. What's the deal there then, Elon? So it's just a dreadful thing. And I think any company that is knowingly on Twitter really ought to be considering whether or not they should really stay onto Twitter, or whether or not they really want to support the sort of thing that Elon Musk is doing. But I feel myself jumping onto a high horse at the moment.
Well, look, if you'd like to find out whether people are truly verified or they are, like me, a paid verified user with a blue tick, and I did it fundamentally because I wanted the edit option and I wanted the extended tweet option, which I just think would have been great features to launch and just not make me have to pay for those extra things. But if you want that, there's a little Chrome extension that you can load. I'll put it in the show notes. That actually changes the verified on people who haven't actually been verified and have just paid to say paid. So now you know who's paid and who's truly verified.
Yes, it's very nice. It's called $8. You'll also find it as a plugin for the Firefox browser. And I believe that the Chrome extension also works on things like Brave and those sorts of things as well. So very clever. Somebody has basically hacked in and worked out how to tell the difference on that.
Now, moving on. I was gonna do the whole thing.
Now, moving on, this is where Sam talks about Noster to no avail, because James will edit it out in the edit.
I was going to say. I wasn't even going to start. I just stopped before. I just thought.
But you've been using Noster. Adam Curry's been using Noster. What's the big deal with Noster?
Well, the only big deal with Noster is, James, that it supports the Lightning Network and it supports payments. And so when you start to look at how can you then integrate a social, distributed, decentralized network with Lightning payments, ActivityPub sadly isn't the answer, nor's Mastodon, and unless they make a massive change. And so there seems to be a real movement towards looking at what Noster can do. Now, clearly Noster is not prime time, but it is getting some momentum. But I do think the integration and native integration of Lightning payments into what it's doing is really interesting. Look, if we think value for value and Satoshi payments is the right thing for podcasting, then we can't simply go, oh, well, Noster's got Lightning payments and value for value, and we think, oh, that's not very good. Clearly, it's on a twin par, I think, with what we're doing in the podcasting world. And I think it's worth looking at. And that's I think, where we are today.
Yeah, I think that's possibly where we are. Although you have been told off, haven't you? You've been told off by...
Oh, yes. I incurred the wrath of the activity pub gods. I had...
yes, Evan Prodromo. Oh, Prodromo.
Yeah.
There you go.
Canadian.
Yes, so Evan, who invented Identica and StatusNet and various other things, he knows a thing or two about ActivityPub and other things, and I love his message to you. Life's not all about payments, Sam. Don't waste your time or anyone else's time on any social networking protocols that aren't ActivityPub. Good luck in your work! Exclamation mark.
Yes.
Yes.
Canadian humour, they're all sarcasm, I think.
Well, I mean, and that's from a Canadian, so that's a proper blast, because you know how polite Canadians are.
Yeah, and then I incurred the wrath of Chris Messina as well, who said, "Does Noster have any semantics?" And I went, "Oh no." Now look, I could have got. I tell you what, I was going for the full three. If Kevin Marks had said Autantic Ceiling and it doesn't have micro format as well, I would have gone, "Oh yeah, okay." Oh, seriously, I've been down this road so many years ago. I mean, I used to stand up on stage and talk about how great the semantics were and activity streams and what we were doing with micro formats. And it's a total waste of time, I have to say. Nobody's consuming micro formats. Nobody has. I mean, Google with Google Plus was supposed to be the big hallelujah that we're going to consume micro formats and reveal it in the browser and all this big stuff. Nada, nothing.
Yeah.
And I still think, ActivityPub's great, and there's a big podcasting community on there now. But if all they're going to focus on is semantics and not look at the next stage of what people are doing today, which is attribution and payment, then no, I'm not an ActivityPub fan.
Yes. Well, I spent quite some time putting web mentions into the Podnews website so that whenever I mention somebody, it automatically goes off and checks whether or not their website supports web mentions. Utter waste of time. Don't know why I bothered doing that, but still, there you go. But web mention enabled and all of that. Shall we move on?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, why not? Let's have a look at some events. Edison Research talking about data around podcast listeners aged 55 plus. There are quite a lot actually, and there'll be a free webinar on April the 13th. It's called Hit Play Boomer, which should be fun. Of course, there's the NAB show, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time in Las Vegas from the 17th to the 21st or something like that. I'm there on the 17th. I'll be talking to Valerie Geller after I talk around some podcast data and some podcast numbers. So it'd be wonderful to see you, but I'm only there for one day because then I'm flying off to Berlin. And I'm taking part in their All Ears conference, which is their German language conference, in Berlin. I know how to say one thing in German, Sam.
Go on then.
I'm not sure it's going to be very, very useful, but it's Wo ist der Hase?
Okay,
Der Hase ist in der Dome.
Where is the what?
Where is the rabbit?
Oh, great.
Where is the rabbit? The rabbit is in the cathedral. I can't imagine that being particularly helpful, but still, there we go. So I'm there on the 20th of April for Spotify for the Spotify for Podcasters All Ears Summit. Looking forward to that.
Now, wait. Jamesy, be aware. That's your European name, Jamesy, by the way.
Yes.
It's a trap, We nearly lost you to the Spotify chapters. What are you doing? Be careful, James.
The Spotify chapters are coming back as well. Once I've worked out how to automate them, I'll tell you. So yes, I'm open to work with anybody. Yes, no, that's absolutely good. But I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to having a day off the following day in Berlin, which is a place that I haven't been to for quite some time. They've even opened a new airport for me, which is nice. So looking forward to a little bit of that. If you are in Berlin and you'd like to catch up for a beer, then that would be lovely. James@crid.land is my email address. What else is going on? iHeart has announced the Black Effect Podcast Festival on April the 22nd. The Publisher Podcast Awards is on the 26th of April, and that's going on in London. The British Podcast Awards have just announced their date and their venue in September. It's the day after Podnews Live, and you can get tickets for Podnews Live in London at podnews.net/live. But also going on April the 22nd is the Birmingham Podcast Festival 2023. Tickets for that are on sale now, and you had a quick chat with Nina Robinson, didn't you?
Yes, she's the organiser, and I thought I'd reach out and find out, why did she start the podcast festival, and what's her background in podcasting?
So I'm a former BBC World Service journalist. I've been working mainly in audio for the past 18 years. So I actually started at the World Service freelancing, and then I moved on to doing a little bit of commercial radio. And then I got my first staff job at the BBC working at Radio 1 Newsbeat. And at that time, One Extra was just launching. So I joined the launch team, and I was there for the very birth for One Extra, which was fantastic. And I was on the news program called TX Unlimited at that time, which was actually really groundbreaking. And, it was a really great place for people of colour from different backgrounds. And it was a really brilliant place to spend my 20s. And then from there, I've just been working mainly in audio news. I've done some work in TV and social video, but audio has always been very close to my heart. And so when I left the BBC at the end of 2020, it was coming back to Birmingham as well that kind of made me realise that there wasn't very much going on in terms of the audio industry here. And I've been thinking about starting this podcast festival for over a year. And I just thought, well, I've got the contacts in the background. If somebody can do it, then I should do it.
Yeah. And why do you feel that Birmingham needs that festival? When we spoke before, you were talking about the fact that the BBC has moved out of Pebble Mill and it's created sort of a vacuum around Birmingham.
So it actually closed. There was a huge BBC presence here in the West Midlands up until 2012 when this site, Pebble Mill, which was very iconic, produced some amazing shows, TV programmes. A lot of celebrities were born here, and that whole site was lost. I mean, I never worked at Pebble Mill, but I've spoken to people here and it's still very fondly remembered. It was such a big campus. There was a pub on the site, big TV studios, like its own ecosystem. And when that left, it was much reduced, the BBC's presence. They basically moved into the mailbox, which was, as you can imagine, it was a box. And a lot of the staff were continually moved out. Like I remember walking around mailbox one year and it was just completely empty. They'd moved all the teams out and then suddenly they realised, oh, there's nobody here. We have to start moving people back again. And in terms of the screen industry, so there has been a revival around Digbeth, and there's a lot of incentives going on to revive the screen industry here in Birmingham, but very little in terms of the audio industry. And my argument is that the audio industry is a feeder for the TV and screen skills. It can't be ignored. It's a very essential part of the creative industries. And so it's even more important then to kind of nurture the podcasting space to kind of grow these kinds of skills. But for me, it's important because I love the podcasting space for its kind of lack of gatekeepers, its diversity of voices, the innovation that you've got there. So for me, it's a very natural kind of thing to want to use podcasting to bring new voices, develop skills in people who might not consider themselves to be able to move into TV or film. It's a really good stepping stone.
Yeah, and you've now got a company called Sound Truism. What is that?
So it's a media production company which I set up in 2021. We specialise in audio production and also factual narrative podcasts. So that's my background, basically. I've been making audio documentaries for the BBC World Service, travel the world, making these kinds of audio programmes, factual, and I want to move that into podcasting. So I want to grow local journalism and create a sustainable model for local journalism again, because there's such fantastic stories that are not being told. And in the vein really of Trojan Horse Affair, the podcast that I love and have listened to many times, which is all about Islamophobia in Birmingham. But that was made by the New York Times. And I just think that there should be some podcast production here in the city that can kind of tell those kinds of stories.
Now, let's go on to the actual festival itself. Tell me more about the festival. Who's keynoting it? Who's going to be attending it? And what's the date of it?
So I'm so happy that the keynote speaker for the Birmingham Podcast Festival is 5 times British Podcast Award winning Sangeeta Pillai. Her podcast is the Masala podcast, which is all about South Asian women talking without any shame or judgment. So taboo subjects is just on the table. And she's brilliant, Sangeeta. She's been called a one-woman powerhouse for her podcast. She is a Spotify original podcaster. She's making an incredible living out of her podcast. So she's really a great person to share her insights into how to make a podcast work in the current market that we've got. And then we've also got the Murky Books author, Jade LB, and she'll be in conversation with Marcus Ryder, MBE. He's a media diversity campaigner and also co-host of the British Black Lives Matter podcast. They'll be talking about decolonizing podcasting, which will be a really interesting conversation. And then we've got some really great local podcasters as well. True Powell, he's a creative entrepreneur here in Birmingham. He's got a podcast. And there's also digital content creator, Brummy Mummy of Two, Emma Conway. She's fantastic, got a really funny podcast. And then we've got some others, which is Dr. Yemisi Akingbobola. She runs the African Women in Media Foundation, and she's got 2 podcasts about the media, women in media. And so, yes, it's going to be a fantastic lineup. It's all happening on Saturday, April the 22nd. Unfortunately, it's Eid weekend. Even my husband says he's not going to come, but I'm just hoping, trying to accommodate as much as possible. It was originally going to be on the 1st of April, but I had to change it because of the train strikes. And then, unfortunately, it's fallen on that. But we want to establish the festival as an annual event so that this year will be really, just to platform some diverse voices. But next year, I want to bring it back bigger and better and build on it year on year.
And the URL for getting tickets is?
birminghampodcastfestival.co.uk.
Brilliant. Now, who's going to be the target audience? Who are you hoping is going to attend?
The event's going to be happening at Birmingham City University, and it's really important for me to kind of make sure that the next generation of podcasters learn the skills and are inspired to enter the space. So BCU students and staff have free access to the event, but it is really aimed at anybody who's thinking about starting a podcast or who already has a podcast and wants to kind of take it up to the next level, because there'll be a lot of audio professionals who will be at the festival giving their insights, giving their experiences. And also we're running a podcast tech tent workshop where you'll be learning new skills around what is the best equipment, hardware, editing. There's an interview skills workshop as well. So the afternoon will be workshops where you can really kind of hone your own skills and learn new things. And then there will also be these panel discussions as well with experienced media professionals kind of giving their views. Also, if any companies thinking about setting up a podcast, so one of the panel discussions is around the power of podcasting for your business or brand. And we've got Richard Meir on, who runs Earshot Strategies, and he consults with all of the big corporates. He's worked with Airbus and the European Investment Bank around what podcasting can do to connect with audiences, also how it can kind of promote the brand values for staff cohesion. There's lots of different ways in which podcasts can be used for business.
Nina, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for organising this festival. I will be there, so I'm looking forward to seeing you in person.
Nina Robinson from the Birmingham Podcast Festival. You can get tickets at birminghampodcastfestival.co.uk. Other things going on. New Zealand, the New Zealand Podcast Summit is on the 13th of May. I'm speaking there. The Outlier Podcast Festival in Los Angeles in the middle of May. And then, of course, the Podcast Show 2023 in London towards the end of May. We're both there, aren't we? So looking forward to that.
We are.
And Radio Days North America happening in Toronto, June the 8th to the 9th. I am talking about tools for radio that podcasting is already using. So if you want to go and see some folks from the radio industry going, wow, at things that we've been playing.
Showing Descript again,
around, yes, playing around with for the last 3 years, then you should go along to that. I actually did a kind of a bit of that in Prague, and it's really good. Just showing some of the tools that because radio works in their own world. Actually showing them all of the exciting things which are going on with all of that. Podnews Live coming up. It's our networking conference. In Manchester on the 13th of June, in London on the 27th of September. You have a new keynote speaker, do you not, for our London event?
We do. I'm very excited to announce that Mouritzen Stronger is now joining us in London as a keynote speaker. Mouritzen, of course, is the CEO of Podimo.
Yes, so that's going to be very exciting. So looking forward to that. That is on the 27th of September. If you are in Catalonia or in Spain, then good news. Podnews Live in Barcelona has been confirmed for the 25th of September. I mean, we've got no venue yet, but let's not worry about that. 25th of September is when that is going to be. More details and information shortly at podnews.net/live. And if you live in Mexico City or near Mexico City, then we will be in you in November and looking forward to that as well. More events, both paid for and free at Podnews. Virtual events or events in a place with people. And if you're organising something, tell the world about it. It's free to be listed, podnews.net/events.
Well, we can book the new camp, 100,000. That's about what Barcelona needs for us.
Yeah, I think that'll work. I'm sure that the sponsors won't mind that at all.
Boostergram
Corner
on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time of the week. It's time for Boostergrams, and it's always good when we get told off, particularly by Brian of London. Why is Brian told us off?
Some person, he said, we misgendered Sammy Hagar. Oh my God, cancel yourselves immediately. He sent us 1948, the Israeli Sats. And yes, okay, look, I didn't know. I took a 50-50 guess. Sammy Hagar. Look, Stevie Nicks, right, is a woman. I thought, yeah, it's another one of those. I am not a rocker. I don't know anything about Rush and Van Halen and God knows what else. I'm a soul boy. So, look, I had no idea. So, Sammy Hagar is a man.
He is. I mean, he rose to prominence in the early 1970s with the hard rock band Montrose. And subsequently launched a successful solo career, scoring a hit in 1984 with I Can't Drive 55. Never heard it. He also enjoyed commercial success when he replaced David Lee Roth as the second lead vocalist of Van Halen in 1985, but left in 1996. Yes, he also owns a tequila brand, because of course he does, as well as a beach bar. So yes. There you go. Hagar, hey.
Thanks for the correction.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Also, Gene Bean, for what it's worth, he says, Buzzsprout talked about a nice way that they've implemented podcast TXT on the latest episode of Buzzcast. Yes, that's a good thing to have a listen to, is Buzzcast, obviously a sponsor. And they're also talking about, this week, they're talking about them joining the Podcast Standards Project, which they were a founder member of. So worth a listen. Thank you for the Row of Ducks, 2222 Sats. Mere Mortals podcast, Kyrin, says that episode I had with Sam is released for anyone curious to know more about Podfans. Super excited to see it up and running at full speed in the coming months. Adam Curry said that he really enjoyed your episode of the Mere Mortals podcast as well. I have yet to have a listen. I apologise. Is it good?
Yeah, well, it's Blimey, God, he does his research.
He does. He does.
Jeez Louise.
Did you tell lots of stories of India and stuff like that in there?
Something about me being adopted, yeah. Something about me being in the army.
Yes.
Yeah, some very strange things he dug out. Yeah, no. But we did get on to, if you want to skip all that, by the way, all that stuff about me, which isn't important. But if you'd like to listen to what we're doing with Podfriends, then fast forward to minute 26 and you'll find out all about it.
Oh, minute 26. Well, there you go. Thank you, Kyrin, for your row of ducks as well, 22 sats. If you get value from what we do, the Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything from it, and we really appreciate your support so we can continue making this show. Here's how you can support this show. Either go to weekly.podnews.net and become a power supporter by using the excellent stuff that Buzzsprout enables any Buzzsprout podcaster to do to offer monthly membership of this particular show. You can subscribe in Apple Podcasts at apple.co/podnews if you like Tim Apple more, or you can support us with sats by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. If you don't have a boost button in your podcast app, you're not using the right podcast app. You need to go to podnews.net/new podcast apps to find a new one like Fountain. So what else is happening for you this week, Sam? Obviously on Mere Mortals, big guest appearance there.
Yeah, no, that was very good. I also found out my old boss, Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy, now owned a 140,000 a Bitcoin, not sats, a Bitcoin.
Wow.
So he's worth $4 billion. Well done, Mike.
Wow. I wonder when he's going to sell them.
I don't know.
Yes.
He's done something really clever, right?
I wonder whether he's got a new podcast app as well.
No, I don't. Well, no, maybe he's got some to invest in. No, he's done something very clever, which was he took the corporate profit that was being held basically normally for buybacks on shares, and he said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to go and invest that into Bitcoin. And he did that a few years back. The board looked at him madly and said, are you sure? But given that Michael Saylor is part mad, part genius, he took a bet on Bitcoin a few years ago and it looks like it's paid off.
Wow. Well, there's a thing.
Now, James, what's happened for you apart from having your ribs tickled?
Well, yes. So apart from that, it's been all exciting. Yes, I had to go and see the doctor, and then I had to go to the hospital and get an X-ray and get an ultrasound, which was very exciting. The last time I went to see an ultrasound being done, it was my daughter in there. This time it was my spleen. So that was nice. I did ask if it was a boy or a girl, but I have a feeling he's heard that joke before. Yes. So my total costs this week in terms of healthcare have been nearly $200. I just mentioned that for the Americans, but there we are. So yes, I'm keeping it very quiet at the moment. It's quite difficult walking anywhere, so there is that particular issue. So I've not really left the house all week, but there we go. I'm sure that I'll get better, and there are plenty of people who have worse things than me. Apart from that, no, I've been having an interesting week, crossing I's, dotting T's. Wheeling and dealing, there may be an announcement on Monday. Well, there will be an announcement on Monday about something that I have purchased. Midlife crisis. Bought that Aston Martin finally, did you? Midlife crisis. I did consider breaking my own embargo and mentioning it here, but I have been one of those people that has actually, I've set an embargo for an hour after the Podnews newsletter comes out on Monday, so I still get to keep that as my own exclusive for an hour. So that'll be fun. So anyway, more details on that on Monday, and looking forward to announcing that. And if you're a fan of this very show, then you will find the announcement hopefully very exciting, particularly if you like reading. And that's it for this week. You can give us feedback using email at weekly@podnews.net or send us a Boostergram. And if your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps. Yes, our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D, and we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy. That was a good rehearsal, Sam. I think we should press the record button now. Get updated every day.
Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.